I freed an alien girl from her collar. Then she called me her husband. The pod hissed when I cut it open, and something inside moved. I almost dropped my cutter. Derelict barges do not have moving things inside them. Derelict barges have broken equipment, frozen cargo, and the occasional body floating in a pressurized chamber, like a bad dream someone left behind. They do not have things that move, but this one did. My name is Cal Denner, and I have been scraping a living off the frontier for 6 years. I dive wrecks, pull salvage, sell it to whoever is buying on whatever station happens to be within fuel range. It is not glamorous work. It barely qualifies as legal work, depending on the jurisdiction, but it keeps me fed, and it keeps my ship, which I call the Persistent Mistake, flying in roughly the direction I point her. The barge had been drifting in a debris field 2 hours out from Culvereth Drift Station. Hull breached on the starboard side, crew quarters open to space, engines cold. Keth Syndicate markings on the hull, which should have been my first warning to leave it alone. The Keth are the kind of organization that makes you understand why some species developed a reflex for running before they developed language. They move sentient beings across the sector the way other people move cargo. No paperwork, no mercy. I should have left the barge alone. I did not leave the barge alone. The pod I cut open was sealed from the inside, which is not how cargo pods work. Cargo pods seal from the outside. This one had been modified, roughly and recently, with what looked like finger-scored grooves cut into the interior locking mechanism. Someone inside had been trying to get out. She was tall. That was the first thing I registered. Tall and folded into the pod like a letter into an envelope, limbs arranged with elegant efficiency to fit a space built for something half her size. Her skin, or what I could see of it between the plates of iridescent chitin, was the deep blue-black of a night sky, and it was doing something I had never seen skin do before. It was glowing. Faint pulses of pale light moved through her, like slow lightning, and even unconscious, even clearly injured, the patterns had a rhythm to them that felt almost like breathing. Around her neck was a collar. I knew what it was immediately, even though I had never seen one in person. Everyone who operates in Keth territory learns to recognize a constraint collar, flat black casing, biolock seal, a ring of neural contact points pressed against the skin. The Keth use them to control any sentient being whose nervous system can receive an electrical signal, which is most of them. You resist, the collar fires. You run, the collar fires. You do anything other than exactly what you are told, the collar fires. And the pain is, by every account I have ever heard, beyond description. I stood there for a long moment looking at her, and I had what I can only describe as a very clear, very quiet argument with myself. The sensible side of this argument pointed out that she was Keth property, that interfering with Keth property was a good way to become Keth property, and that I had a ship to maintain, rent on my dock berth to pay, and absolutely no obligation to risk my life for a stranger I found in a pod. The other side of the argument did not say anything. It just looked at the collar. I pulled out my toolkit and got to work. The collar was biolocked. That meant it was keyed to the neural signature of its registered owner, a Keth handler somewhere, almost certainly dead on this barge. It was designed to be tamper-resistant. The materials were rated against every standard cutting tool. The lock mechanism was shielded against standard electromagnetic interference. Here is what the Keth did not account for. I am human, and humans have been doing electromagnetic pulse work since before we had reliable electricity. We built railguns in garages. We blew out car electronics for fun in parking lots. We had a whole era of civilization where we amused ourselves by finding out what happened when you put the wrong thing near a strong magnet. I do not have any biotech implants. Most species operating in this region do. The Keth built their collars to resist EMP interference, specifically because an EMP that knocks out a collar also knocks out whatever neural augmentation the person wearing it has running. The collar is safe to attack with electromagnetic tools, only if the person wearing it has nothing in their own body to fry. I have nothing in my body to fry. 6 hours, one improvised pulse coil built from my ship's emergency beacon components, and a burn on my left hand that I would feel for a week later. The collar clicked. The biolock released. The casing split along the contact points. It fell off her neck and hit the floor of the pod with a sound like a small dead thing. She woke up 3 seconds later, gasping, her whole body blazing with light. The bioluminescent patterns went frantic, firing in all directions, rapid and uncontrolled, and I stepped back because I had no idea if that was dangerous. Then the patterns slowed, steadied. She focused on me with eyes that were enormous and faceted and the color of deep amber. She looked at me. She looked at the collar on the floor. She looked back at me. She said, in standard that was careful and slightly accented, "You removed the binding." I said, "Yes. Can you walk? We need to leave." She studied me for another moment with an expression I could not fully read, on a face built along entirely different lines than mine. Then she said, "By the covenant of the unshackled, the one who removes a binding against all odds becomes the chosen of the freed." A pause. "You are my chosen." I said, "That sounds important. Can we discuss it on the ship?" She passed out again before she could answer. Her name was Sael. I learned this when she woke up properly, 2 hours later, in the bunk I had cleared for her on the persistent mistake, while I pushed us away from the debris field at maximum thrust, and tried not to think about the Keth transponder on that barge, and how long it would take someone to come looking. She explained the covenant the way you explain something to a person you expect to be slow about it, carefully, in small pieces, with visible patience. The covenant of the unshackled was old, older than Vrathi space travel, which was itself older than humanity's written language. It held that if a Vrathi was freed from a binding by another being who had no obligation to do so, and who overcame what should have been impossible odds to accomplish it, that act was a declaration. Not of love, necessarily, not at first, but of worth, of choosing. The freed Vrathi became bound to the one who freed them not by law, but by honor, the deepest currency her species possessed. The word she used for it translated to chosen. The word she used for the relationship translated, as far as she could explain it in standard, to something between partner, guardian, and bonded. In a human context, the closest word was husband. I sat with this information for a while. Then I said, "I didn't know about the covenant." She said, "That is irrelevant. The act speaks. Intent does not override action in our law." I said, "What if I explain that I'm not looking for a partner?" She said, "What you are looking for is also irrelevant. The covenant is not a request." I said, "I see." She said, "You do not appear upset." I thought about it. "I'm mostly concerned about the Keth," I said honestly. "The existential marriage question feels like a second-tier problem right now." Something shifted in her bioluminescent patterns. A ripple of pale gold moving through the deep blue. I had no idea what it meant. I filed it away. Sael was navigator caste. She told me this, the way someone tells you they have a doctorate, which is to say, she mentioned it once, flatly, and expected you to understand its weight. Navigator caste Vrathi are the highest intellectual tier of their society. They carry star charts in their neural architecture, literally encoded in the structure of their memory, deep maps of space that take decades to build. The Keth had taken her specifically for those maps. They had wanted to pull the data from her and use it to chart a course through a region called the Unmeasured Dark, a stretch of space that no one had ever navigated successfully. She had refused, for 3 years, to give them anything. The collar had not changed that. I thought about someone wearing that thing for 3 years and not breaking, and I had to look away for a moment and busy myself with the navigation panel so she would not see my face. The Keth found us 11 hours later. Their enforcer ship came out of the debris field like it had been waiting, which it possibly had. They opened a channel. A flat, cold voice told me to surrender my vessel and its occupants for processing. I had 11 hours to think while Sael slept. I had spent most of them at the communication terminal, doing what humans have always done, when faced with an overwhelming force they cannot fight directly, filling out paperwork. Sael was navigator caste, which meant she held a diplomatic credential under the Vrathi Compact, a 600-year-old interstellar treaty that even the Keth technically recognized, because it predated them, and several governments they preferred to keep friendly. A navigator traveling in bonded company had a right to charter protection. The persistent mistake was, as of 4 hours ago, registered as a navigator charter vessel under Sael's credentials, which made it a diplomatic ship, which meant the Keth could not legally board it. I transmitted the registration. There was a very long silence from their ship. Then a longer one. Then they cut the channel. They broadcast a bounty on us both before they left. But they left. Sayel had been awake for the last 2 hours of this. She stood behind me at the nav console and watched me file forms in triplicate and pull up treaty databases and cross-reference trade law from 6 different governing bodies. When the Keth ship departed, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You fought them with documents." I said, "I couldn't fight them with anything else." Another pause. "It worked." I said, "Usually does, if you know which documents to use." She made a sound I did not recognize. It might have been the beginning of a laugh. We were not safe. The bounty was real, and we both knew it. We pushed toward the deeper frontier, away from Keth-controlled space, burning fuel faster than I liked, because speed mattered more than economy right now. Sayel spent most of those days at the navigation console, not because I asked her to, but because she seemed to need something to do with her hands, or whatever the Vrothi equivalent was. She started adjusting my jump routes without asking permission, and the routes she chose were better than mine. Significantly better. I did not point this out because she clearly already knew, and pointing out things people already know is, in my experience, rarely useful. We talked. It started as practical conversation, the kind you have when you need to coordinate with someone on a small ship. Then it became something else, the slow kind of knowing you build when there is nothing to do but wait and talk and learn. She was fascinated by humans, in the way that a scientist is fascinated by a specimen that keeps doing unexpected things. She asked why I ate food that caused me visible discomfort. I explained spices. She processed this information with the expression of someone being told that water is actually a social construct. She asked why humans made decisions based on what she called emotional resonance rather than logical probability. I tried to explain intuition. She said that sounded like malfunction. I said it had kept us alive for 100,000 years before we had computers to do the math. She did not have a response to that. I asked her what the light patterns meant. She said it was like asking someone to explain facial expressions. You either grew up reading them, or you did not. I said I wanted to learn. She looked at me for a long moment, amber eyes giving nothing away, and then she started teaching me. Slow gold meant contentment. Rapid pale blue was focus, the kind she had when she was navigating. Deep red in the chest was anger, though she said it was rare for her. A pattern of rippling silver that started at the base of her neck and moved upward was something she could not translate directly. The closest she could get in standard was the feeling of looking at something you did not expect to be beautiful, and finding that it is. She showed me this pattern once, in passing, and then moved on to something else very quickly, and I decided not to mention it. 3 days out from Kulvareth, we picked up a distress signal. It was Vrothi in origin, a small family ship, running dark except for the beacon, being herded by 2 Keth pursuit vessels toward a collection point. There were 6 people aboard, including, the manifest showed, 2 children. I looked at the signal. I looked at my fuel gauge. I looked at sail. She said, "I know what you are thinking." I said, "Probably." She said, "We are 2 people on a ship, rated for 2. I said, "Yes." She said, "This is not a refusal." I said, "No, it isn't." We pulled them out. The extraction was fast and ugly, close enough to the Keth pursuit ships that I could see their hull markings on the exterior cameras. Sayel handled navigation while I handled the docking, and the combination worked in a way that felt less like improvisation and more like something we had practiced, which we had not, but which apparently did not matter. 8 people now, on a ship built for 2, burning hard away from Keth space. Among the 6 we rescued was a senior navigator, an older Vrothi male named something I could not pronounce correctly in any of my 3 attempts. He looked at me the way you look at an unusual piece of furniture that has somehow found its way into a formal dining room. Then he looked at Sayel. He said, "In standard, clearly for my benefit, this is your chosen, this mammal?" Sayel's bioluminescence went very still for a moment. Then she said, "He removed a Keth constraint collar with hand tools and defeated an enforcership with treaty law. Do not question the covenant." It was the first time she had defended me directly. I noticed. She noticed that I noticed. We both looked at the navigation console and said nothing about it. The senior navigator gave me a long look and then said, grudgingly, acceptable. Sale told me afterward this was extremely high praise from him. I told her that was the saddest thing I had heard all week. The silver pattern moved up her neck and she turned away before I could be sure I had seen it. The Keth came for us in force 2 days later. 3 ships, at the edge of known space, blocking every practical exit route. The bounty had escalated. They wanted Sal and the other navigators. The message they sent was polite in the way that a wall is polite. Solid, unyielding, and not interested in your opinion. I looked at the star charts. I looked at the region ahead of us, the one every navigation system in the sector flagged with a single notation. Unmapped, do not enter. The unmeasured dark. I said, Sael, can you navigate that? She said, no one has ever navigated it. I said, that is not what I asked. She was quiet. Her patterns cycled through something complex that I was not yet skilled enough to read fully, but I caught pieces of it. The rapid blue of calculation, something deeper underneath, that might have been fear, and then, slowly, something brighter. She said, I can calculate a probabilistic path. The gravitational topology is unknown, but the entry vectors are consistent. I can extrapolate from those. A pause. The probability of survival is 67%. I said, the probability of survival if we stay here is 0. She stared at me. Humans, she said. Then she sat down at the navigation console and started working. What happened inside the unmeasured dark is difficult to put into words, and I have tried several times since to find ones that fit. Space does not behave the way you expect inside it. Gravity pulls from directions that do not correspond to any visible mass. Light bends. The stars outside the windows look wrong, angled incorrectly, as if the universe is showing you its back wall instead of its face. Sael navigated by instinct and calculation simultaneously, her hands moving across the console in patterns I could not track, her entire body blazing with light, all of it the rapid pale blue of deep focus, brighter than I had ever seen it. She spoke in a language I did not know, quietly, to herself, and I did not interrupt her because I understood, on some level that had nothing to do with language, that she was in a place I could not follow, doing something that very few living beings had ever been equipped to do. We came out the other side in 11 minutes and 40 seconds. The space we entered was quiet and clear, and very far from anywhere the Keth had ever reached. Sael did not move for a long moment. Her bioluminescence settled slowly, the frantic blue cooling into something I had not seen before. A deep, steady gold shot through with silver, both colors moving together in a slow rhythm. I watched it for a while, before I asked what it meant. She said, it does not translate directly. I said, try. She thought about it. Awe, she said, and the desire to go home, together, at the same moment. I nodded, and did not say anything, because some things do not need a response. Sael's charts of the unmeasured dark became the most significant navigational discovery in 300 years. She shared the route with every governing body that would receive it, except the Keth. The passage they had needed her to find for them was now open to everyone, freely, which meant there was nothing left for them to take from her. The Vrathi Compact sent a diplomatic fleet to the coordinates we broadcast when we emerged. The Keth faced them and did their math and withdrew. The bounty was quietly dissolved. The 3 Keth pursuit ships that had cornered us were never sent after us again. We returned to known space on a route that Sael calculated with the same quiet confidence she had applied to everything since I had first pulled her out of that pod. The family ship we had rescued made it to Vrathi space safely. The senior navigator, boarding his transport at the station where we finally docked, stopped in front of me and said, in standard, you are less inadequate than I initially estimated. Then he left. Sael told me that was, in the entire vocabulary of Vrathi compliments, approximately the highest rung. I told her that explained a great deal about the Vrathi. The silver pattern moved up her neck again, and this time I was close enough to see it clearly. We were tied up at Culvereth Drift, the same station I had left from, weeks earlier, on what had seemed like an ordinary salvage run. The ship was quiet. The paperwork was filed. The Keth were gone. There was nothing left that needed doing right at this moment, which was, in its way, the most unusual thing that had happened in weeks. I said, you know the covenant was invoked accidentally. You could argue it doesn't count. Sael said, I could argue many things. I waited. She said, "The covenant does not require continuation. Only the initial act of choosing matters under our law." A pause. "I am choosing to continue, separately from the law, as my own decision." I looked at her. She looked back at me, amber eyes level, bioluminescence quiet and steady, the slow gold of a pattern I now knew well. I said, "Okay." She said, "That is your response?" I said, "Did you want something more formal?" She said, "No," and the silver pattern moved, just slightly, from the base of her neck upward. "Okay is sufficient." Chosen. I had gone into that barge looking for salvage. Metal, parts, maybe some sealed containers worth selling. Something I could turn into fuel money and move on. I found something worth keeping. It just turned out to be me.